Hi, in this video I'm going to be giving you a full run through of the Doubler 2 software. So Doubler 2 is a standalone application that works on Mac or PC and allows you to use your voice to control any music making software, be that GarageBand, Pro Tools, Fruity Loops, Ableton, Logic and all the other digital audio workstations. And what that allows you to do is trigger drum samples in your DAW using your voice like this, and also control melodies like this. So let's dive straight in and take a look at Doubler 2. So I've opened up the Doubler application and the first thing it's asking me is what audio input do I want to use with Doubler 2. So that can either be the Doubler USB microphone, that's what I've got here. It's the optimized microphone for use with the Doubler software. If you are a user of Doubler Studio Kit 1, it's the same microphone for that as in Doubler Studio Kit 2. It's got some neat features like handling noise reducing capsule. It comes with our own ASIO driver, so if you're using it with Windows, it's going to have that straight out the box. And it's the optimized device for using with Doubler. But one of the great things about Doubler 2 is you can also use your own microphone through our new calibration process. So if you want to do that, you're going to plug in your microphone at this point. You're going to click here, I want to use my own microphone, and it's going to take you through that calibration process. We've got separate videos on that for both Mac and Windows, so that'll talk you through how to do that. And if you are using your own microphone, we recommend that you use a dynamic microphone and that you plug that into your computer using an audio interface. And if you're a Windows user, it's great if that audio interface has its own dedicated ASIO drivers, because that's going to allow you to use Doubler at low latency, which for real-time software is obviously very important. Anyway, we don't need to worry about that because I've got the Doubler USB microphone here. I'm going to plug that in and we're going to go straight into the software. So now I've plugged in the Doubler microphone. It's taken me straight into this profile screen or the home screen. And you can see there's a few things up at the top here in the ribbon. On the left up here, if I click on this Voclear logo, it's going to show me information about the software, including links to some important documents, our terms and conditions, and end user license agreement, stuff like that. And it also shows you the version number of this version of Doubler. From time to time, we will make updates, we'll fix bugs, we'll add new features, and so look out for those. There will be automatic prompts for new downloads when we release an update, and also the version that you're looking at now may have additional features to the one that I'm walking through today, but fundamentally they'll be the same product. So then we can ignore this bit in the middle. Coming over to the right, you can see here the audio input that we've currently got working with Doubler. So that's the Doubler USB microphone. If we were using our own device, this is where I could click and recalibrate that device or calibrate a new device if I wanted to. To the right of that, we've got this settings cog. This is going to show us all of the audio settings for Doubler 2. This is where there'll be some slight difference if you're using on Mac or Windows, whether you're using the Doubler microphone or your own microphone. So I won't go through these in detail in this video, but if you do want to have a look through and be taken through what each of them mean, we've got a dedicated video for Mac and for Windows. Check out the calibration videos and we'll go into it in detail. One thing I do want to quickly point out though is that unlike in Doubler 1, we do have the option to have an output device. And that's because in Doubler 2, we have got some inbuilt audio synthesis and some inbuilt samples. So I'll come on to those a little bit later. And then to the right of that, we've got this user icon. That's where you can link to your user profile on our Voclear website. And then to the right of that, we've got this ability to change the size of the application. So now we're on the profile screen. This is where you would see any profiles that you've created before and be able to access them, or it's where you can create a new profile. And you can see that we don't have any profiles created at the moment. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new profile now by clicking on this plus. So we've landed in the play screen of your profile. So as you can see, we've got these different tabs at the top here. We've gathered certain features together and put them into individual views that you can move between by these tabs at the top. We're currently in the play tab. This is the main view for when you're using Doubler, when you're actually playing with it. Next to that is the train tab. This is where you're going to teach your voice to Doubler and train triggers. Next to that, we've got the key tab for more sophisticated key restriction settings. We've got the chords tab. That's where you can change your chord presets and map individual notes to different chord patterns. And then finally, we've got the Assign tab, which is where you can change your MIDI output settings and also your inbuilt audio synthesis settings. So some other things to point out are on the left-hand side, we've got this VU meter. So if we're too loud, that's going to turn red and show you that you're clipping. Along the top here, we've got the name of the profile. So you can see at the moment it's untitled. So I'm just going to go ahead and name this my new profile. And if I click the save icon to the right here, that's now saved. And it's basically saved all of the settings within each of these different tabs. And that's what a profile is. It's a collection of saved settings. So if I go back to the home and click here, you can see that the profile is now created, and I can reload it, and that's going to reload all of my saved settings there. Anytime I make a change, I'm going to be prompted to save with the save icon at the top. And along the bottom, you can see we've got the synth presets. I'll talk more about that later. And you can toggle on and off the outputs. So we've got inbuilt audio. That doesn't go out to your DAW, but it allows you to have instant feedback from Doubler 2. And you've got MIDI out. So you can toggle those on and off here. And finally, we've got this CPU reading showing the CPU usage at any one time from Doubler. So the Play tab is split up into two sides. On the left, you've got triggers. And so this is where you can trigger one-shot samples in your DAW through a percussive input sound. And on the right, we've got pitch, and this is where you can control pitched instruments and effects and chords and everything to do with pitched sounds. In Doubler, you can do both of these at the same time if you're capable of it, or alternatively, you can turn one side off and focus on the other. And so that's what we're going to do now. I'm going to toggle off pitch using this button here, and we'll focus a little bit more on the triggers. So you can see here we've got 8 different potential triggers, and at the moment, we don't have any set up. So in order to add a trigger, I'm going to click on this plus sign here. This has taken me to the Train tab, and this is where I can teach Doubler my voice in order to trigger a sound. So the way a trigger works is it maps an input percussive sound from me to an output sample that I want to trigger in my DAW, and you have to teach Doubler your input sound to map to that output trigger. So the first thing I'm going to do is choose what's the output sample that I want this to map to. So you can see it's created this bass drum here as my first trigger, and that's going out to note 36 or C1 on a traditional panel roll. It's also been called bass drum because that's what the traditional placement would be for that sample on like the 80s MIDI protocol. Whether or not it sounds like that based on the drum rack that you've got set up in your DAW may or may not be the case. And I can change the output sound that I want, the output note, by using this drop down here. We've also got these 8 little kind of shortcuts. And for each of these 8 shortcuts, we do have our own inbuilt sample as well. So here I can set the note. I'm happy with the bass drum. I'm going to keep that. And the other thing that I need to do is record some examples of the vocal sound I want to make to trigger that. So for the kick drum, I'm going to make a kind of sound. And I'm going to record these examples into Doubler now. So you can see that I can give up to 12 examples. There's a little thing here called velocity response. So Doubler is velocity responsive, and if I lay down a drum beat in my DAW, I can control the velocity of that drum beat by changing the velocity of my voice. Maybe you don't want that, so you can turn off the velocity response here, and you can do that on a per trigger basis. If I made a mistake while I was training, I can clear all the takes here and start again. When I'm making these examples, it's important I choose the right kinds of sounds. So I want them to be percussive, quite direct and sharp, each of my examples to be consistent. If I do something that's slow or quiet or has a kind of gradual onset, it's not going to work as well. So nice, sharp, percussive sounds work best. I can also rename my trigger up at the top here. So if it wasn't actually a bass drum because it's mapped to something else in my DAW, I might want to rename that there as a little reminder. Also, what can be quite useful is if I want to make a little reminder of the kind of sound I made, I could write some kind of phonetic description of that in the trigger box here. Finally, the last thing I can do is also mute the trigger if I want. So maybe I've added a few, I want to mute it on and off. I can do that here, or I can delete the trigger and just get rid of it and start again. So I'm going to go ahead and add a couple of more triggers now. So now I've added 6 different triggers. I could add some more, but it's probably pretty much at the limit of my beatboxing abilities. And you can see there's another thing up here going on as well, sensitivity. So a high sensitivity will allow you to be very responsive to all the input percussive sounds you might make. Could be susceptible to doing double triggering or picking up background sounds that you don't want, but does allow you to do very quick different flurries of beatboxing sounds. Or I could turn the sensitivity right down. Better for a live environment, but you have to make sure that you're quite loud into the microphone. It comes set at a kind of reasonable middle ground. Mess around with that depending on the environment that you're in. So now I've trained these 6 triggers, I can go back to the Play tab and start using them to create music. So all those sounds you're hearing there are actually the inbuilt samples in Doubler 2, and I can turn those off, and I'll just show you quickly how this comes out as MIDI in your DAW. So in the background I've got Ableton running, and I've already brought a drum rack in. It's being controlled by Doubler 2, it's on channel 10, I'll talk more about that in a moment. It's this 808 core drum kit. So I'm going to go ahead and record some MIDI from Doubler 2 into this channel. So you can see as I've done that, it's laid down the triggers in real time, creating this beat. Let's just see what it sounds like. And it's also got all of the velocity information down here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit more about the pitch side. So I'll turn that back on and turn triggers off. I'm also going to switch back to the inbuilt audio and turn the MIDI out off just for now. So you can see on the pitch side there's quite a lot more going on. Along the bottom here we've got this piano roll with some settings around it. We've got pitch bend turning on and off, we've got key restriction, we've got chords on and off, and we've also got the ability to change the octave. I'll talk about all of those later. And on the right we've got these 4 dials. So these are our CC dials, the top 3 being val and the bottom being envelope. You can use those to control effects in your DAW, and I'll talk about those more in a little bit later as well. And then central here to the whole of the application, one of the main features is our pitch wheel. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that now. So the pitch wheel is separated into 12 different segments, one for each of the notes in the Western chromatic scale. So at the top here we've got C, and then in this gap here that would be C sharp, then we've got D, and this gap here would be E flat and E, and so on, all the way background until you get to C, so you can do multiple octaves up and down. So when I sing into Doubler, D, 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 you can see we get this kind of spoke, this choral spoke showing where we are in our input pitch relative to our output pitch, and it works a little bit like a compass guiding us towards the notes we want to sing. Now, one of the questions might be, why are some of these notes, all the accidentals, grayed out? And that's because in Doubler you are always in some kind of key restriction, and as a default for a new profile that key restriction will be C major. So you can see here we're in this key of C major. I can go ahead using this drop down to change the key. Maybe I'll go for C minor, and you can see as soon as I've done that it's changed the notes that are available in the pitch wheel. Doubler won't let me be out of key, so if I'm in the key of C major I can't sing a C sharp. If I'm hitting a C sharp with my input pitch, Doubler is going to choose the nearest note and trigger that one instead that is in key. So that's where this stickiness slider starts to come in. With a high stickiness, it's going to be more difficult to move from one note to the next, the benefit of which means that you're not going to be accidentally moving between notes, but the downside being that it's slightly more difficult to move between them. Or I can have a low stickiness, which is going to be very responsive to any changes in my input pitch, which is great for fast melodies, but can result in more ghost notes. So you probably want to play around there and see what works for you. We have it set here as default at about 75%, which seems to work well for most people. So another thing you can do is deselect notes within your scale. So if I go ahead and click on this E, you can see that it gets hatched out. It's now deselected. It's unavailable on the piano roll. And if I sing between the D and an F, it's going to skip the E entirely. If I want to go ahead and turn on notes that aren't in this scale, I actually need to go over to the key restriction tab. So let's go ahead and do that now. So the key restriction tab is separated into 3 parts. At the top here, we've got what the current scale is for this profile. So it's C major, and this drop down is exactly the same as the drop down in the play tab. And if I change this drop down, it's going to change the key that we are in this profile. The other 2 parts, the pitch wheel and this list of scales, are all about suggesting new scales to you based on a selection of notes that you've chosen. So on the left-hand side, you can see we've got this pitch wheel. Every note in choral is a selected note, and I can go ahead and start changing these. So let's turn a couple of these notes off. And you can see that as I do that, it's changing on the right-hand side what the list of suggested scales are. So if I turn on an accidental, for example, the top scale it's suggesting now is a D harmonic minor, and Doubler has a preferred suggested scale, which is highlighted in purple. And you can see this in relation to your selected notes over here with this purple highlight around the pitch wheel. So I can go ahead and browse some of the suggested scales, and when I do that, Doubler is going to give me a little preview of what that scale sounds like. So you can see that there are 2 different categories. There's the subset and there's the full. So if you're on the full, it's going to apply the full scale, so the full D harmonic minor. But if I go over to the subset, you can see that it's restricting only to the notes that I've actually selected. So it's still within the parent key of D harmonic minor, but only to these specific notes. And as I'm switching between these different suggested scales, nothing's actually changing up here in my key restriction. So if I click back on the play tab, for example, I'd still be in C major and everything that I've done here would be lost. And that's because none of these scales are actually going to change until I click the update button down here. So I can click update and you can see I'm now in D harmonic minor subset, specifically on those notes that I created. There is another way that you can also input these notes, and that's by singing them in. So you can see here there's this button, Sing in Notes. If I click on that, it's going to clear all of the notes and I can now sing in whatever note restriction I want. D, D, D. So I've sung in 3 notes there, the D, F and the A. And Doubler is suggesting maybe you want to use the F major pentatonic, and it's suggesting the full scale. So you can see here the C and the G are the other 2 notes in that scale. And I'm happy with that, so I'm going to go ahead and update it and click on there. So that's the key restriction tab. I'm actually going to go ahead and move back to the C major scale for the rest of this video. So we've been playing around with the pitch in Doubler 2, and up until this point we've been listening to the inbuilt sounds. Now I'm going to show you how that comes out in MIDI in your DAW. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the inbuilt audio off here, turn the MIDI out on, and come over to Ableton where I've already got a synth set up. So I've already brought a synth in to Ableton. It's coming in from Doubler 2 on channel 1. Let's go ahead and record some of the MIDI. Do 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 do. So you can see as I've input those sounds, it's brought in the MIDI notes along with the velocity, and let's see how it sounds. So it's sounding great. Obviously you could quantize it if I wanted. Let's just hear it again, but without the click track. Cool, let's go back to Doubler 2 and look at some of the other features. So back in Doubler 2, and I'm going to switch back to the inbuilt audio and turn MIDI off just for this next part, because I'm going to talk a little bit more about chords. So you can see here next to this key restriction, there's another little toggle switch next to chord. So if I turn that on, it's going to turn on our chord feature, and you can see on the play screen we've actually got this drop down for different chord presets. So every different scale will have a selection of presets. Every scale has the preset of triads, and for some of them we have a few others as well. And this is what it sounds like if I'm now activating chords in Doubler. D, 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 D. So when I sing a note, Doubler is going to map that to a certain chord and trigger that chord. And I can change the preset here. We've got a pop simple preset, a pop advanced preset, both of these for C major. But if I want to get more involved about what these presets actually are, change some of the voicing or change any of the mappings, I can do that by going over to the chords tab up here. So on the chords tab, you can see on the left hand side we've got a drop down for the presets, exactly the same as in the play tab, and here I can choose between triads, pop simple and pop advanced, which are the presets available for C major. When I change the preset, it's going to change the mapping between the input note that I sing and the output chord that Doubler triggers. On the piano roll here, you'll see all of the notes that are in the scale. So in C major, that's C, D, E, F, and so on. And underneath that, it shows the chord that that note is mapped to. So C is mapped to C major. This is in pop simple. D is mapped to G major. E is mapped to C major again. And I can change that back to triads, and you can see that it changes that mapping based on the preset. If I wanted to, though, I can go ahead and change any of these individual chords by clicking on them. So say I click on the E. I want to change the E minor. I can do that by selecting one of these options down here, or even choosing from a long list of chords if I want. So I could change that there to the A minor, and you can see that I'm now in a custom preset. The other thing that you'll notice is we've got this version of the pitch wheel over here. So I've gone back to triads in C major, and you can see that on the E, we're mapped to an E minor, which is a B, E, and a G. And it's going to show you that chord in relation to the scale on the pitch wheel, which is a nice little feature. Along the bottom here, we've also got some other options. You can see that there's a voicing option. So that's going to change the width and the spread, the notes that are selected, and the way that chord is actually played. We've got block, we've got cluster, we've got spread. They're all different ways of representing the notes in that chord on the piano roll. So mess around with those and you get slightly different sound quality based on the voicing. We've also got a root note bassline option. So basically, if you have that on, it's going to play the bass root note of that chord as well, just to give a little bit of extra depth. That's on as a default, but you can turn it off if you want. And you can also choose what octave you want the chord to be played in relation to your input voice. So we have octave follow on as a default, and what that means is if the pitch in my voice goes up, then the chords are going to move up, and if the pitch in my voice goes down, then the chords are going to move down. You can turn that off and it will just actually centralize the chord based on a certain note, and you can also shift the overall relative octave to your input voicing as well here if you want. So let's go back to the Play tab and see how some of these chords are coming out in MIDI. So back in the Play tab, and I've still got chords active and triads on, I'm actually just going to switch over to the Assign tab briefly. And that's because you'll see that for each of our output options, triggers, pitch and chords, you can change the MIDI channel that it's sent to. Now as a default, your triggers are going to go to channel 10, your pitch is going to go to channel 1, and that's the same for pitch and chords. But if I want to, I can actually send the chords out to a different MIDI channel. I'm going to go ahead and do that and change the chords to channel 2 and go back to the play screen. And what that allows me to do is in your digital audio workstation, in my case I'm using Ableton, you're able to then split out the pitch melody and the chords part into two separate channels. So I'm going to go ahead and turn MIDI out on, turn inbuilt audio off, and we'll see how that looks in the DAW. So you can see in Ableton, I've already got the lead synth that we were using earlier. That's mapped to channel 1, and that's giving us our bass line. And we've also got this chord synth, which is mapped to channel 2, and that's specifically fixed to our chord output. So this is what the chord synth is sounding like. Do, 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 do. And this is what the bass synth is sounding like. Do, 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 do. But I can actually record these both at the same time. So let's do that now and see how the MIDI comes out. Do, 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 do. So you can see there, and we're on the chords channel at the moment, that it's recorded all the output chords, including the bass note, because I had that as a preset for my voicing. There was maybe a couple of ghost notes, maybe one here. I could go ahead and clean that up afterwards. And you can see on the lead side, I've got the same thing. This is the bass line that was recorded at the same time. But let's just see what they sound like together. So that's how you can record chords and melodies at the same time in your digital audio workstation with Doubler. So back in Doubler, and let's talk a little bit more about the Assign tab. So we were just talking about how your trigger sounds, your pitch sounds, and your chord sounds can all go to different MIDI channels. As a default, that's channel 10 for triggers, 1 for pitch, and we've already changed this to be 2 for chords. Underneath here, you'll see that we can also change what the inbuilt synth sound is for the pitch and chords. So for triggers, it's an 808, and that's fixed as default. But for pitch and chords, we've got a selection of different synth sounds, and you can mess around with those to change the inbuilt audio sound. So let's talk about some of the other things in the Assign tab. To the right-hand side, we've got all of these different dials and outputs, and that links to the CC dials, the vowel dials, and the envelope in the play screen. We'll talk more about those in just a moment. And then at the bottom here, we've got this little section on pitch bend. So I'll go ahead and turn pitch bend on, and when I do that you can see that it's lit up a pitch bend range here of 12 as a default. That's a full octave, and that's quite a big pitch bend range, which is great with our inbuilt audio. But if you're using pitch bend with a synth in your DAW, you're going to need to make sure that the pitch bend range in your synth matches the pitch bend range in Doubler 2. Now as a default, a lot of synths have a pitch bend range of 2, so that'd be a good place to start. But you can normally find it in the settings of your synth. So you can apply pitch bend just to the melody line and have the chords straight underneath, or if you turn this toggle switch on, you're going to be applying pitch bend to both the melody and the chords simultaneously. The last thing to point out here is this drop down. So there's two options here for bend response. There's IntelliBend and there's TrueBend. So IntelliBend is on as default, and that's our smart pitch bend option. So what that does is kind of anchor you to a certain note and try and identify if you're actually trying to bend away from it or not. And if you're not, it's going to hold on that pitch nicely, and if you are, it's going to bend you to the next note. So that's the default setting. The other option is TrueBend, and that will just follow exactly your input pitch. So it's going to be very responsive to any changes in your pitch and follow that all the time. I'll show you how those look over on the play screen now, starting with the IntelliBend option. So I'm going to go ahead and turn chords off. You can see here we've got a shortcut to turning pitch bend on and off and setting the pitch bend range. And if I go ahead and sing a note, you'll hear the output from IntelliBend. Dee, 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 dee. So when I'm trying to hold a note, it's anchoring me to that note, but when I try and bend away, it allows me to bend up or down based on my output pitch. This is also where the stickiness can come into play again, because a high stickiness will again make it hard to transition between notes, and it's going to make the anchoring of the IntelliBend stronger, or a low stickiness is going to make the anchoring of IntelliBend weaker and allow me to bend between notes more freely. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off pitch bend now and talk a little bit more about these 4 dials here. So we've got these 4 dials here on the right hand side. The E, the R and the U are all related to vowel sounds. So if I got this, E, A, U, E, A, U, and they respond to the vowel sound that my voice is making. And then this bottom one here, ENV, responds to the envelope. Ooh. So I can map those to different parameters in my DAW and control different effects. So back in the Assign tab, and you can see that we've also got representations of those dials here. We've got the A, the E, and the U, and the ENV. And they'll still respond to my input sound in Assign. E, A, E, A, E, U, E, A. You can see that we've actually got these 2 sliders next to the dial. So the slider on the left allows you to map the input range, and the slider on the right allows you to map the output range. So let's take this R dial as an example. Now you can see that when I'm going between the E and the R, I'm not actually turning the R dial all the way around. So if I wanted to do that, I can actually just remap and change the max, pull the max down a little bit. And now you can see that I'm turning the dial all the way around. I can also change the mapping for the output. So a CC dial typically goes between 0 and 127, but maybe you don't want to output to that full range. So I can bring up the minimum here or bring down the maximum, and that's going to remap this dial between the new range. But let's go over to the DAW and see how we're going to map these to parameters on our synths. So back in Ableton, and I'm controlling this lead synth here. And what we can do is map some of those vowel dials from Doubler 2 onto parameters of this synth. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the synth control panel here, and you can see that there's loads of settings and parameters that I could be mapping those vowel dials to. And we'll go ahead and choose one, maybe this cutoff filter here. So what I do is click on the MIDI mapping, click on the filter that I'm interested in, and then I'll come back over to Doubler 2 and choose which dial I want to map to that parameter. So I'm going to go ahead and choose the E dial, and I click on this map button. So you can see that when I do that, back in Ableton, we've now got CC21 mapped to that filter cutoff. So let's see what that sounds like. So as I'm making the E sound, it's turning the filter cutoff up, and as I'm making the E sound down, it's turning the filter cutoff down. So that's how you can control parameters on your synth using Doubler. So that was the full walkthrough of the Doubler 2 software. We've got loads of other videos diving into some of these features in more detail. You can find those on our tutorial page on our website and also on our YouTube channel. Thanks very much.